I don't have to tell you, caste has come to America. Seattle, of course, passed an ordinance in February banning caste discrimination. California currently has a bill that passed out of assembly last week. Harvard, in its employment agreement with teaching assistants, recognized caste discrimination and gave it as a grounds for complaints against advisors. Okay. But Americans haven't grappled with one simple question, which is, what is caste? If you're going to protect caste as a category, you have to know what it is. There's this, I think, very juvenile textbook idea among Americans and among activists in America that there might be, 3 castes in India. There are Brahmins who are all ultra wealthy, highly respected individuals who are manipulating India from behind the scenes. There are the Dalits who are being oppressed, and there are a bunch of people in the middle. But of course, Brahmin is not a caste. That's a Varna. It's not a caste. Dalit is not a caste. What is a caste? Now, Indians will know there are, let me get the numbers, 1,108 scheduled castes in India, 744 scheduled tribes, 2,479 other backwards castes. There are an uncounted forward castes. Who's a Brahmin? Well, you'd think that everyone claims, well, my caste is Brahmin, but there's no list of Brahmins. You can't be an officially registered Brahmin in India. You can't be an officially registered Dalit in India. Of course, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh have their own caste systems. Caste is not particularly connected to Hinduism. The idea that Hinduism is a caste religion has 2 errors in it. First, that Hinduism is a religion, as an ism. There are many traditions that we collectively call Hindu traditions. There are many dharmic traditions. There are debates as to the extent to which other religions that arose in India are also Hindu or not. I know these are highly politicized, but there are no firm boundaries. There is no ism to Hinduism. There are Hindus. There are many traditions among Hindus, and almost all of whom recognize each other. But, of course, in Indian caste surveys, the government caste surveys don't include Muslims. By definition, if you're Muslim or Christian, you don't get a caste. But in reality, of course, Muslim and Christians do have castes. And in fact, in the Pew Research surveys on India, and I quoted Pew data earlier today, they do ask Muslims, what's your caste? And overwhelmingly, Indian Muslims report their caste. Well, caste is recognized among Muslims in India. Caste is recognized among Christians, not in the same numbers as Muslims. For Christians, it's about 1/3. For Muslims, it's, I think, over 3/4 of Muslims recognize a caste. Caste exists in Nepal, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh. So if America is going to have rules against caste discrimination, well, the first thing America needs is a list of castes. Who's going to be protected? And who's going to be protected from whom? Because although in the American imagination there's a clear hierarchy, in the British colonial imagination there was a clear hierarchy that they attempted to impose on Indian society. Many of you will be aware that there are endless disputes, even among untouchability, among who's untouchable to whom. Right? Nobody has, again, there's no definitive list. It'll be very difficult for caste to become a protected category in America because how many employees does any American company have? Divide that by 5,000 or so castes, and you'll find that you only have 1 or 0 people in each caste, or jati, which is what we mean effectively when we talk about protecting castes. But then if that becomes embedded in law, right now, city ordinances are one thing. City ordinances are probably not going to be enforced. Employment contracts are another thing. It's probably not going to be legally enforced. If caste protections get embedded into law, well, we're going to need a series of protected categories. But then, what about other non-American sources? For example, all of you are aware in Rwanda, in 1994, there was the Rwandan genocide. Will Tutsis become a protected class in American law. Nigeria has, I had it in my notes here somewhere, Nigeria has, I can't find it in my notes, I can't read my own notes. Nigeria has something like 80 recognized tribes. Well, there are many Nigerian Americans. There's certainly intertribal discrimination in Nigeria. Will America protect Nigerian Americans from protection against other Nigerian Americans? This is, of course, it all becomes a theater of the absurd. Now, in the United States, there have traditionally been two broad liberal, and I emphasize that word not in the Democratic Party, in the academic meaning of the word liberal. There have been two broad liberal traditions in America about how to redress historical injustices. One is affirmative action. We affirmatively identify people who require assistance in having their group receive special treatment in order to redress historical injustices. And the other approach is equal opportunity. We become blind to the question and attempt to eliminate those distinctions among groups. India, of course, has exactly the same two traditions. So the Indian Constitution recognizes caste distinctions, and that's why there's a whole system of reservations in India. But there are also social movements in India. And the irony is, Hindu reform movements have overwhelmingly attempted to eradicate caste distinctions as opposed to celebrate or enforce caste distinctions. So it's taught in US schools that caste is part of Hinduism, is in fact exactly the opposite. Unless you want to go back 200 years, then we can argue over it. And I know there are historians who argue over the degree to which Hindu religious authorities promoted caste distinctions. I'm not going to take a position on that. I don't have documentary evidence. The experts differ on it. But for 200 years, Hindu reform movements have promoted intercaste dining, have promoted intercaste attendance at temples. I don't know. Now, I'm sure some of you might have a better knowledge than me, can point to some prominent Hindu sect today that promotes casteism. I have not heard of one. In any case, it's extremely rare. I'm confident that all of the temples that those of you who are Hindu in the audience attend discourage caste hierarchy. So the idea that Hinduism is a caste-based religion is false on both counts. It's not an ism, and it's not caste-based. So the irony is, it's been the Indian government that has embedded caste hierarchies in law and perpetuated them, while Indian civil society, both religious and non-religious, so the RSS, the Rashtriya Samaj Sangh, is not an explicitly religious organization, it's a nationalist organization that has similarly, as with temples, worked to eliminate caste hierarchy in people who attend their own events. They've promoted intercaste dining, they've promoted temple access to people of all castes. Now, which approach is better? Let's leave that. I mean, in the United States, there's a basic divide. Democrats promote affirmative action, Republicans promote equal opportunity. I know that's not exactly true. I know they're different, but broadly speaking, that's the divide. In India, there's a basic divide. The Indian National Congress promotes affirmative action. The BJP, in most cases, promotes equal opportunity, though the BJP strategically embraces affirmative action where it thinks it will win them votes. And there are lots of complexities around this. Both traditions are, from an academic and intellectual standpoint, respectable, well-supported approaches to addressing caste distinction. But most countries have sought to address and redress their own legacies of discrimination. Whether you do it through affirmative action or equal opportunity, you're addressing your own distinctions. America must address America's legacy of racism, because America, whether you want to hear it or not, America does have among its foundings a racist origin and a slaveocracy in part of America. And when people say America's a racist country or a slave country, well, there were a group of states that tried to secede from the Union to ensure that slavery was maintained as an institution. That's part of the American tradition. It's an indigenous American problem that Americans created and Americans have to solve. And which solution Americans take to it, affirmative action or equal opportunity, is something that obviously Americans have to deal with, just as Indians have taken different approaches to addressing caste. The bizarre thing happens when we take other countries' systems of hierarchy and discrimination and import them from abroad. When we're trying to address other countries' hierarchies of discrimination in a US context. Can it be done? Certainly it can be done. Would it be easy? It'd be extremely difficult. Is it the right thing to do? Well, I'm not sure that the United States has a responsibility to address all of the world's various forms of hierarchy in American law. My instinct is that it's not practical. But if American political units, if states, if ultimately the Congress decides to do something about it, it has to be prepared to deal with it in all of its complexity. And I encourage those of you who are fighting these transparently, let's face it, transparently anti-Hindu caste legislation efforts, instead of fighting it on the basis of, how dare you attack India, how dare you attack Hindus, this is something that is, it's not fair for Hindus to face this. I said, no. I said, yes, no one in Hindu religion wants caste distinction and caste hierarchy. We'll work with you to, no one wants it. We'll work with you to stop it. But legislation is an entirely unworkable way to do it. And if you insist on legislation, we need a list of 5,000 castes because you can't have the legislation without it. And we need to import this entire infrastructure. And I think the whole effort would probably collapse under its own weight if there was an attempt to do that. It's ironic that the salience of caste, not caste itself. I know that people still can be very proud of their Jati group and proud of their family origins. I'm proudly Greek and Italian American. There's nothing wrong with being proud of your origins. The salience of class, by which I mean, does caste determine your employment prospects? Does it determine your marriage prospects? Does it determine your income and business contacts? The salience of caste is declining in India, has been declining for 100 or more years in India. It's ironic to see it being resurrected in the United States. Thanks, everyone.